Hi guys, Liberty lovers, welcome to this very special edition of the Scottish Liberty Podcast with me, Tom Laird, and also with my co-host. He's not big, but he is very clever.
Anthony Samaroff.
We are the Richard and Judy of the Libertarian Podcasts, and we have today a very special guest on the show. We are thrilled and slightly aghast to have Dominic Frisby, actor, comedian, and voiceover man pursuivant, and he's made some time to come and talk to us today. Dominic, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here. Hello, Tom. Hello, Anthony. Lovely to be here.
Great stuff.
And great to meet you yesterday, or day before yesterday it was.
The day before yesterday
time.
at your show. Yeah, so you're doing a show at the Fringe. It's called Let's Talk About Tax.
That's right.
Weighty subject. First of all, give us your resume. Tell us a bit about yourself, and then tell us about the show.
Well, my kind of day job is actor, doing voiceovers, stand-up comedy, and I've done that for a long time. And then in about 2005, I had a bit of money, and I wanted to invest it, and I started reading, and then actually more effective than the reading was listening to a lot of podcasts, particularly American podcasts.
Yeah.
Very good way to transmit information, podcasting, by the way. And I'm already finding myself getting sidetracked, but the human brain is wired to take in information through the ear.
Yes.
That's how we pass.
Yes.
We've always naturally passed information. And reading is like a little bit artificial almost. It was a way of passing information across distances. And I don't think the brain absorbs it quite as well as it does when you hear it in the ear. And I think that's one of the reasons why podcasting is so popular, because you can just absorb a huge amount of information very quickly.
And I'm definitely an auditory learner, and most of my information from economics came from podcasts before I started reading books. So I have a similar experience.
I've done it the old-fashioned way. All the stuff, a lot of the stuff I learned was from cassette tapes, and I was in my car. Used to listen to long journeys. I used to be a salesman at one time.
Okay.
So that's how I learned. So I couldn't agree more. And there was a time when they first came out, podcasts were really popular. They kind of died a little bit, and now they're making a comeback again, and in no small measure due to us, I'm absolutely sure.
That's a bit like often new technology does that kind of wave on a stock chart. If you look at a chart of, I don't know, the NASDAQ, and you got that big boom into 2000 and then a kind of collapse, and then the next big boom. Anyway, so I was listening to a lot of stuff, 2005, 2006, and one of the areas where I wanted to, where I was persuaded that was a good investment at the time was in gold. Right. And of course, gold is a very political investment. So the more you started finding out about gold, and you suddenly realised how our system of money works and how corrupt the whole thing and all the injustice it creates and so on and so forth. And I just started reading more, and I got completely hooked and found myself getting more and more cross at the way everything worked. And there seemed to be a lot of Americans who were onto this, but there seemed to be a lot more ignorance
in Europe,
over here. And so gradually, and then I started my own podcast, an investment podcast at one stage. It was an excuse to meet people without, because everyone's promoting their own brand. And so it became a very good, in fact, there's no better way of meeting people than through, interviewing them. And the podcast grew, and then one lady called Merrin Somerset Webb, who writes for Money Week, she was one of the people I interviewed, and she said, we need people like you to come and write for us. So she offered me a column for Money Week, and then a book came, and then... So basically I employed all my skills that I had from comedy and voiceovers and started to use them in economics, and it's now my kind of mission to try and tell people how the world works, how they've been conned, and try and put it all in a language that people understand.
Yeah. What was your political background, or any political background before that?
Well, my dad and his brother are both quite political men, but they're kind of... I can remember was it in the 80s, in the mid-80s, when the SDP formed, and I would have been in my early teenage years.
Yeah, the Gang of Three.
Yeah, the Gang of Three. And my dad was like, this is brilliant. This is going to sort out the Labour Party. The Labour Party's not unlike now with Michael Foot rather than Corbyn now. But, the Labour Party's gone too far. He was quite passionately centrist left.
Okay.
Right.
And now he votes Lib Dem.
Right, okay.
And but he's quite politically active, and he says, I can't believe I've spawned something that is somewhere to the right of Genghis Khan, he says about me. But
hardly fair. Yeah.
No, I don't think it's fair, but that's he likes saying it.
It's funny, and I like the way that you've brought humour to your communication of ideas. Like, I've seen quite a few of your videos on YouTube, and they always have a funny twist to them, but you can fit in quite a lot of information in a short space of time. And in one of our previous discussions on Facebook, I was telling you that I'd gone to the literature on economics, and I was like, wow, I mean, no wonder our ideas of like free market and limited government have gone so badly. If this is the best they can do in terms of communicating ideas in a way that's accessible, I veered away from writing or talking about economics publicly for quite a long time, because I thought surely anyone who'd want to know knows already. All the information's out there in podcasts. What I didn't realise is I'd stitched together all the information I'd gained from here, there and everywhere, and some people just need an easy road of entry where you can make a shortcut for them and make it accessible. And I mean, I commend you on being able to do that in such a skilled way.
I'd spent ages, I think it's maybe my star sign or something, but I spent ages trying to condense ideas into as small a space as possible. And I've got little rules I use. There are certain words that have become toxic, particularly to the left. Words like capitalism, what they understand as capitalism, you and I would call crony capitalism, but that's what they think capitalism is.
Markets is another trigger.
Free market, and these kind of words. So I always try and avoid, wherever possible, these words, so that these ideas are not stained with the kind of post-Thatcher reaction brush, if you see what I mean.
Yes, and it's funny when you include that, oh, you must be to the right? All of these are just packages of ideas. What we call as right here is different from in America, but in either case, okay, well, if you're against abortion, you must also be for owning guns, and you must be for this. And they're packages of ideas, the right, the left. And surely it is good to have a political philosophy underlying your ideas, and you can draw ideas for that. But if we're going to talk about policies, then we can actually assess an idea or a position one by one and against the moral standards that we believe in. I mean, in everyday life, we don't hit people, we don't take their stuff. Of course, we don't call it that when the government does it. Now it suddenly becomes war and taxation.
Yeah. I mean, the left... Sorry, Tom.
I was going to say, but would you agree that our old, when guys, especially of our generation, I'm 49, you're
46, yeah.
Guys of our generation, and definitely our parents' generation, those old notions of left and right, those concepts of left and right, are almost meaningless, I think, in the modern context. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would. I mean, in terms of policy, sometimes I sort of vaguely agree with the Labour Party, sometimes I vaguely agree with the Tories. Broadly speaking, I would say I'm towards the Tories on economic things and towards the Labour Party on, socially just things.
Yeah.
But it's a much more handy definition, I think, is to look at politics in terms of authoritarian and libertarian.
Yeah.
And Theresa May, I mean, I quite admire the strong decisions she's taken, but my goodness me, there is an authoritarian lady.
Yeah, she ain't no libertarian, bro.
No, she ain't that.
No.
And, and Corbyn in his own ways, you either wonder if he's a wonderful delegator or just incredibly incompetent.
Right.
Well, I mean, the thing I liked about Corbyn was when he was talking across the house to David Cameron at one point, and they were talking about Trident, and Corbyn said to him, will it be all right then for those people who don't agree with Trident to opt out for paying for it in their taxes? And I thought, yes, Jeremy, maybe you're getting it. Now extrapolate. Why should people have to pay for things that they don't agree with, whatever they are? But of course he didn't extrapolate, unfortunately.
One concept that people don't understand let me backpack a little bit.
Okay.
So I wrote various books, both my books, the focus of the book was, if we want to fix everything, we've got to fix our system of money.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a book a lot about gold, and that was called Life After the State. And then I wrote another book about Bitcoin, because that was the obvious next logical thing. And then I was thinking, what should I write a book about next? And then I figured tax. And then I thought, well, I'll do an Edinburgh show about tax, and I'll write a book, and I'll tie it all in. Okay. And then, of course, in writing about tax, I've now become convinced that fixing tax is almost more important than fixing money. The two come hand in hand. But I've read loads and loads of history of tax. And, you know, tax is legitimate theft or forced theft or whatever you want to call it. And people think that it has to be compulsory. But in ancient Greece, they actually had a voluntary system of tax. And what ended up
Well,
happening?
America had a voluntary system of taxation to start with for most
did
of its
it?
history. Yeah, it's
Okay,
a
I didn't know
relatively recent thing in America's history that people were compelled to pay tax, and it's still unconstitutional for the government to tax
Income.
income.
Yeah, no, that I know, and I knew that income tax. It first came in. Well, it came in the North. One of the reasons the North beat the South in the Civil War is income tax.
Yeah.
Because the North levied an income tax, and the South, which has a much more kind of libertarian, laissez-faire tradition, just didn't have the infrastructure, and the South ran out of funds quicker than the North did.
Yeah.
And then income tax went away, and then it came in 1913, but it was only really for like the top few
right.
percent.
Yeah.
And income tax only became payable for every man in, I think it was 1942 or 1943 in the Second World War. And there's a fantastic song written by Irving Berlin, who one of the great American songwriters. There May Be Trouble Ahead was one of his numbers. But this song goes, I paid my income tax today. And one of the little stanzas is, 1,000 planes to bomb Berlin. They'll all be paid for, and I chipped in. That certainly makes me feel okay. But the clear thing is, you know, we need to pay for this war,
Right.
and income tax is behind almost every war. There's a tax story, but in recent years, it's usually an income tax story.
And of course, it would be incredibly hard to wage a war without the ability to tax. I mean, war is the use of resources to destroy other resources, you know, a
Absolutely.
bomb. So how are you going to profit from that unless someone else is paying for it? By the same token, when you look at the fact that taxation isn't voluntary, it's really quite astonishing that it's taken us this far to actually get something of a libertarian movement online, because how much reason and evidence do you need to figure out the fact that if only one organisation, the government, is allowed to provide a service and they're going to force you to pay for it whether you like it or not, you're going to get a pretty terrible service. I mean, you know, what is that cognitive dissonance? Why is it that so few people can grok the fact that forcing people at gunpoint to pay for a monopoly service is going to lead to poor value for money and poor quality of service?
I don't know, but it's so set in how society is that
It's
people
fossilised.
don't. Yeah, it's fossilised, exactly, and people don't question it. And I tried. I mean, what you just said there, Anthony, was very well phrased, and I'm always a bit more. I try to do it a bit more, you know, because you said if there is a monopoly service and you are forced to pay for it, that service will not be very good. And I was trying to be a bit more gentle because I'm never quite sure. So I'll always go, and I'm not sure whether I'm right to do this, by the way, but I'll kind of go, well, what if the service you get for your money is no good? Well, you can't withhold payment. And I'll always be a bit more in the show. You may notice, and I think for the hardcore libertarian, they want more
principle, maybe, or something.
They want more hardcore enunciation of ideas, but I've always seen it as my mission to convert the undecided middle rather than preach
I
to the.
think we need people communicating these ideas in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
If I was trying to talk a left-wing person round, I'd use completely different appeals than if I was trying to talk a right-winger around. So I think that your videos and your show, which I'm excited to hear more about.
Where do people, though, why is it that people feel that it's some sort of moral duty and that it's like eating your greens or going for a run or having a cold shower, you know, it's inherently a good thing to pay tax, and if you don't pay your tax, it's morally abhorrent. Where does that come from? For me, I would think it's a moral duty personally to avoid paying as much tax to the government as you possibly can.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree. And I don't know exactly where it comes from, but we're seeing for now this growing moral argument that you are a bad person if you avoid paying tax, and not just taxes, you know, direct taxes. We're the next kind of big tax that is coming, in my opinion, is people's quantitative easing, and all quantitative easing is basically an inflation tax, a debasement of money tax, and. You know, there's a massive argument already on the left, and we're probably going to have some kind of mansion tax as well. And you will be, if you're opposed to it, you will be considered, a bad person. You don't care about people's welfare. We need this money. The government finances like this. We need more money for the NHS, and we need some of your money for the NHS. But they've used this moral argument in the past. In medieval times, there was knights who not unreasonably didn't want to go to war to fight for their king would have a tax levied against them called the cowardice tax.
Right.
And so there's a clear use of a moral
shaming tactics. Exactly.
And so this won't be the first time that the moral argument gets applied.
Okay.
And in fact, it wasn't in all through Orwell's 1984 there were moral arguments why the government would always have to do what it did.
So what is this? Is this your first time at the Fringe as an act?
No, I came here first time 98.
Right.
Just doing open spots, and then 99 I did a 20-minute slot in a 3 acts in a compere show at the Café Royal, and the first solo show was 2000.
Right.
Then I did another 2001, then I took a year off in 2002, and then I did another in 2003 and got divorced in the middle of the festival.
Right, okay.
And then after that I just kind of had young kids and...
How was the reaction of the audience to you getting divorced in the middle?
I didn't really dwell on it too much in the act.
It wasn't publicly.
Yeah. But I mean, I wasn't very good then, and I had some nice ideas and some nice things, but not. I'm a much better comic now,
right?
And I'm having a much better time this festival.
Can I say every comic that I spoke to loves your downfall parody
do they?
about the comics, about the comedians. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's been done to death, that other type of thing, but that is particularly good. But for somebody that knows about economics, I mean, the Fringe is notoriously, I mean, they say nobody makes any money at the Fringe, right? I mean, is that generally true? Or unless you've got a machine behind you like the Gilded Balloon or whatever?
No, well, I'm doing 2 shows. I'm doing a show on the Free Fringe where audiences come in for nothing.
And pay for whatever they
do a bucket at the end.
That show?
Sure, that's called The Upper Class Rapper, and it's basically a posh person rapping, and that's a much, much funnier show than the tax show. The tax show is more interesting.
Where can we catch you?
You can catch that at the Café Royal, or it's actually called the Voodoo Rooms.
We know the Voodoo Rooms.
Above a restaurant called the Café Royal.
Okay.
And that's a really good show, and it's going really well. And even though it's free entry, I will make money on that show. Not a lot.
I mean, do they pass the hat round at the end?
You pass the hat round, and depending on how many are in, you make anything between, I think the most I've made is like 180 quid, and the least I've made is like 40 quid or something like that so far. So, you'll make enough to cover your food and drink for a day and maybe have a bit of pocket money left over. The tax show, which is selling better, it's almost, it's sold out pretty much every night,
wow, fantastic.
which is very good, will lose money.
Right. Okay. There's an economic lesson in there somewhere.
Well, there is, and actually the economics of the Free Fringe are really interesting, and also the economics of comedy. Again, this is an article I'm trying to pitch to various publications. Nobody's picked it up, and that's because they lack vision. But comedy is pretty much, or the live comedy circuit is pretty much the single most libertarian existence there is.
Yeah.
If you look at the comedy circuit, there are gigs from the proverbial room above the pub right through to Wembley Arena. Massive, massive wealth, right through to people working for absolutely nothing. And there is no government intervention of any kind on the comedy circuit. And so you have this huge variety of venues, you have this huge variety of businesses. There's no corporate might at all. The one corporate giant is Jongleurs, and that keeps going bust. It's all small businesses. There's no minimum wage. If there was a minimum wage, if you looked at the conditions that comedians start out working in, if the Guardian got hold of that and applied their logic that they apply to other businesses, comedy would not last. Everyone is working for nothing. Open spots are exploited. You don't get paid for gigs. The conditions are awful. You find yourself having to go miles and miles and sleeping in the most terrible places.
Then in America, some comedians actually have to pay to do them.
Sure,
to do them gigs.
Sure. But every comedian makes the choice to live through this hardship, because at the end of the thing there is there is wealth and fame and everything else. Now, if you, for example, had a minimum wage in comedy, there's a really delicate infrastructure, and business clubs go bust all the time, but another club comes along, and it's constantly improving. And the circuit's going through a bit of a recession at the moment, which is a good thing. So certain acts are dropping out and doing other things. There's a lot of belt tightening. The acts that are staying in are improving their acts. They're having to work for less money, but it's it's this constant improvement. Now, if you had a minimum wage, instantly all the open spot nights would disappear. So there'd be no place where people can go to ply their trade and get good, because no open spot night would be able to pay for it. All the new material nights would disappear. And these are like almost the most, that's like the plankton in the whole eco thing. And so it's this incredibly libertarian existence. And it does not matter if you went to Eton or if you went to some grotty school down the road. It doesn't matter if you're disabled. It doesn't matter what accent you have. It doesn't matter if you're English or foreign or
Just
Scottish.
be funny.
Exactly. That's the only thing that matters. And in fact, it's almost an advantage to have something in inverted commas wrong with you. It's an advantage to have a disability. It's an advantage to have one leg or a stutter or some terrible childhood or whatever it is, or even a disability, whatever it is. There's guys with multiple sclerosis doing it. There's the posh lords doing it. It's everyone from every walk of life. And the only thing, your currency is laughter. Either the audience laughs at you or you don't. And in fact, often the funniest acts aren't the most successful because there'll be somebody else who's more driven or more thick-skinned.
But why
nothing matters except that you're funny. And yet, so it's this incredibly free market. So, and you've got all this, and here is a glorious libertarian existence where meritocracies and everything, it all forms itself out, and it's so competitive. There is no business more competitive in the world than comedy. And yet, if I'm on the bill with you, I want to be the funniest guy on the night. You want to be on the funniest guy on the night. You want to be on the funniest guy. And despite this, there is an incredible camaraderie between all the comedians. And so you've got all this. It's a wonderful free market existence. And yet, as you say, all comedians, bar a couple of enlightened folk, are crazy left-wing statists.
Because I can only think of you and Jeff Norcott. Really, that's the only ones I can think of who you would call maybe even right of centre.
Yeah, there are a few, but those who think like that tend to keep their politics themselves. The left-wing guys are very, I'm in favour of this and Guardian this and NHS
David
that,
Cameron a twat,
all that stuff, and you'll get round of applause. Who's George Bush's thick, and the guys who don't have those politics. So what you look out for is a guy who you go, what's his politics? He never talks about his politics. They tend to be the ones, So, and it's amazing. So you've got, comedy is supposed to be a place of free speech, and there's incredible diversity in everything except opinion.
Well, we had a guest on just the other day who was talking. His show, The Free Fringe, is called "This Is Not a Safe Space," and that's the very thing that he was talking about. Is that how you have to be very careful about what you say. I mean, you in Russia, you can actually get away with, as long as you don't slag off Putin, you can get away with saying more in comedy and on stage than you can and actually in the UK, especially on the university and college circuit.
I voted Brexit, and I wrote quite a few articles about Brexit, and there was a lot.
You racist, immediately,
and everything,
all that,
and so. But fun enough, I took that stance that we've described, the very gentle, not aggressive. I didn't mention immigration because for me it wasn't one of the issues, and. Although on the immigration subject, if you can't have open borders and a generous welfare state, you've got to choose between one or the other. But that's another.
That's another argument.
And I wrote lots of general articles, and it was funny because I got this kind of grudging thing of, actually Frisbee knows what he's talking about, and he's arguing for Brexit, and there was quite a lot of respect.
Oh, very good.
And I got a few people saying, the only comedian who's voting for Leave is, I think Norcott voted Leave, but I certainly did. But lots of people go, but he's also a financial commentator. But there was this kind of, respect that I quite enjoyed. The Guardian wouldn't publish any of my stuff, I'm living in a flat up here with Andy Zaltzman, who's a political comic, and the deluded Guardian reader, and he has a gig called Political Animal. On the night before Brexit, he got me to come and do a gig. So I thought I did some of my gentle political stuff that I did in the tax show, and then I did like 3 minutes on why I was voting Leave. and I gave them 10 reasons in 3 minutes. And I got to reason 9, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this." And then on reason 10, I gave was to do with fisheries policy. This crazy fisheries policy that's created all this waste.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some guy in the audience just went bananas about fisheries policy. And this is a 90% left wing thing. And we ended up having this huge like row about fisheries, EU fisheries policy. And I'd stormed the gig up until that point. And then I had my kind of storming closing song, which kind of went okay. But it was amazing how just angry this guy came, because I was, and most of the audience were on his side.
Yeah.
Because it was just a very entrenched metropolitan Remain crowd.
Yeah. And where was this gig?
It was on the South Bank, right at the National Theatre, on the underbelly of the National Theatre. I mean, it's as fucking left wing as it gets. but that kind of not like old school Labour left wing, modern Metropolitan Guardian left wing.
Yeah.
But I came away from the gig, and Andy was like really pleased, and he was going, "Oh, it's really good to finally have a right wing guy say some of the things the opposite." And I was going, "Yeah, but I don't want to do that again, Andy. I don't want to just go there and be shouted at."
Yeah,
and so,
like a bear pit.
That's why Farage, you may or not like him, but the guy is a legend, because he's just for the whole life. Yeah. He's just said it and said it and said it, and he's been shouted at and smeared and had. I don't know how that's probably why he's retired. He's just sick of all the smearing that's gone on. But what thick skin that guy must have to be able to do that.
But where do UKIP go now? Because it's that they've achieved possibly the most successful political party of all time. I mean, they had one policy really, and they got there in the end.
Unbelievable. Well, we haven't got there yet.
Well, exactly. We're not out the woods yet.
But where does UKIP go? Without Farage, it's rudderless, and Carswell doesn't want to be the leader. It's a shame that Carswell.
Stephen Wolfe was looking good, but
Wolfe's all right. He's a nice guy. I met him once, but he's no Farage.
Right.
And that party needs Farage.
Right.
And so I don't know where it goes, but it could.
Is there any real need for them to exist, so to speak? Because if they've got, if it goes ahead and the Brexit goes ahead.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Because he is the champion of. Farage has become the champion of the working man. And there's something very traditional about Farage.
Right.
And you may dislike it. A lot of people dislike it, but he represents maybe not a Scottish thing, but there's a kind of old school Englishness that you still find outside of the cities, where there's a clear, nobody knows who the English are, but outside of the cities there is this clear English identity, and there's in touch with the countryside, in touch with the land, and beer and pubs and cricket and all these kind of things, and these people felt that they weren't, the shires basically. They felt that they've been overlooked for decades, and previously they had some representation in the Conservative Party, and also they had some representation in the Labour Party, and they felt completely lost and unrepresented.
Well, funnily
and Farage
enough,
spoke for them.
Funnily enough, when we went to the Mark Thomas gig, one of the things that he did say was that in his home, not his hometown, where the Red Shed was, this thing's called the Red Shed, and it was this hub of trade union activity and so forth. He said that on the day of the Brexit vote, they'd never seen anything like it. They were queuing round the block. And people were saying, "I've been voting Labour all my life," or they've turned their back on us, they've turned their back on working class people. And today they get a kicking, and it was nothing to do with racism or immigration. It was just, we're just sick and tired of the same old. I mean,
it was big two fingers to authority.
Yeah, it did.
It was a great night. That Brexit night.
I was like,
texted me.
Yeah, my text was, "Holy fuckballs, we won."
It was just incredible, and I'm mates with Steve Baker,
right,
and. And he was like the chairman. He's like the big guy who organises he whips all the Tory rebellions. He's a really nice man, passionately libertarian. He's there's probably 2, maybe 3 hardcore libertarians in Parliament. Steve Baker, Douglas Carswell, and maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg's more of a kind of classical liberal, but he's basically a libertarian. So there's those 3.
You got Daniel Hannan, he's not
in. But in the actual House of Commons, there's those 3.
Okay.
And Steve Baker. Anyway, he said to me, I ran into him in the street on the Monday before the vote on the Thursday. And I said, let's go for a pint. You need to just walk away from it all for a bit. And he said, all right, yeah. And we went for a pint. And he goes, Leave's going to win. And I was going, no, it isn't. He said, Leave is going to win. You don't know what we're seeing, behind the scenes. And the only thing that can save it for that, and they've seen the postal votes, and people can't. It's not allowed to be known what the postal votes said. Yeah. But Cameron and Osborne both know that the postal votes has gone dramatically in favour of Leave, and there's no way that. Nobody was allowed to see the postal votes, but the rumour was that the postal votes had gone this way, and that is why. Steve was going, that is why Cameron and Osborne both look so terrified and they're getting so aggressive about this because they both realise they fucked up. Yeah. And Leave is going to win. And the only thing that can save it for Remain is the Joe Cox murder. That's the one thing that might swing it back round. Yeah, and all the markets thought that. If you look at what the markets did after the announcement, all the pound rallied and the stock markets all rallied, and they thought it was that was game over. Yeah. And then, of course, Sunderland came in, the Sunderland vote came in, and it was clear. And there was a brilliant guy on Twitter who was one of the statisticians for Leave, and he was doing these tweets. And this, again, it's a libertarian thing. He was so far ahead of the BBC. It was wonderful. So I was following this guy on Twitter and watching the BBC, and you just realise how far behind the BBC was. And he was going, for Leave to win in Sunderland, we needed 51.3, and we got 52.4. So we got 1.5% more than we needed, or whatever the numbers were. And then he did that. He did that with Newcastle. He didn't do it with Gibraltar. And he did it with Newcastle. And he was studying. And I suddenly looked at that and I went, blimey, Leave's going to win. Right. And it was just clear then. And you could still, and that Sunderland vote came in, you could still get a bet that if you put £1 down, you would lose £5 and make £95. Right. If Leave won. The odds were still so skewed in favour at one stage. And so I just looked at that and I thought, and I put a bet on the pound to go down, and I put a bet on Leave, and I just sat there and then watched the whole thing unfold, and it was just, what a wonderful night. Yeah. But it was brilliant just to see how far, and he had 1,000 followers, this guy, and he was just tweeting the Leave probability things, and he was just so far ahead of the TV.
But it's incredible to watch as well that I've never seen so many people crying in their suit. I mean, it's like the anger in the Remain camp at being defeated.
And all that stuff about Leave lied. Oh, so house prices have gone down by 20%, have they? The economy's imploded. I thought interest rates were going to have to go up if we voted Leave. Oh, they've gone down. All this lying. And yet, apparently, Leave were the liars. And then they're all going, oh, well, where's our £350 million that we were promised for the NHS? Well, A, we haven't left yet. Yeah. And B, nobody who was in the Leave campaign has any kind of power to make those choices anyway.
That's true. Yeah.
What they said is the economics are, and with that money could be spent, so anyway, what a fantastic night. Yeah. I'll never forget that. I was all on my own. I've played football and I'd been invited to one of the parties in it was actually the Leave.eu party. A friend of mine was going, he invited me. That was the one where Farage did the Victory for Decent People speech. And I was going to go, and then I hurt my ankle playing football. I thought, I can't be bothered to go in and just watch Remain lose. Remain win. It'll be too depressing. So I sat down at home and I thought, I'll just watch the first one come in. I cracked open a beer, and then, oh my God, and what a night.
I couldn't believe it.
I couldn't sleep. I was so excited.
It's the first time in my life that I've ever voted. I mean, I was politically agnostic for a long time. I never even bothered voting anymore because I thought it was just no point. This is the first time in a long time, maybe even ever, that I voted and felt that I actually made a difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember I was 1997. I was still deluded in those days, but I voted Tony Blair in 1997. Okay. And I was like, when that landslide happened, that was like great. I can remember that election very clearly, and I remember the one that Kinnock was expected to win, and then do you remember the exit poll? The Kinnock was expected to win. It was the one that Major won.
Yeah.
and there was the exit poll, and Kinnock's face suddenly went. I watched that with my dad, and my dad said, "Oh my God," he kept talking about the expression on Kinnock, and because it was, but that was great. And I remember, you see, 1997. I remember Michael Portillo losing his seat, and that was one of the. I just hated Portillo. Of course, I rather like him now. I think he was great. But at the time, I was just caught up in the whole kind of national dislike of Portillo.
Do you think we're going to get another electoral surprise with Trump? Because I was sure he was going to lose, but more recently, I think he's probably going to take it in America, actually, especially now he's at least appealing in some capacity to like working people, and he's not selling the normal Republican line, which is cut taxes, less regulation. Although he does say those things, he's really trying to appeal to working people in manufacturing.
Absolutely, he is appealing to the disaffected, overlooked, exploited white working class American, and that is a huge voting majority. And he's presented by the left as this beast, and people.
Don't get me wrong, I don't trust him, and he ain't no libertarian, brother.
No, he certainly isn't.
No.
But I've watched his speeches. He's charismatic, man.
Yes.
He's a good speaker, much better than Hillary. When he says something, it goes in, it hits a nerve. Whereas Hillary, you just think, no, you're just trotting out generic stuff.
Yeah.
But you've been told to say, so he chimes with people for sure.
He does.
But it's not just this disaffected white working class vote. It's the fact that by voting for Trump, you are effectively, a bit like Brexit, giving the two fingers to everything that is. And I think a lot of people just want to vote for Trump. A vote for Trump is a vote for the two fingers. I mean, and again, it's amazing how people see through the bullshit. I've been thinking a lot, and so to answer your question is, I didn't think Leave would win. I was convinced Remain would win, rather like happened in the Scottish elections. I thought there'd be a lot of noise, and then it would be 54-46 or something like that in favour of Leave. But that's because I'm in my little metropolitan bubble, and I didn't realise how pissed off people are. And as a result of that, the odds you can get on Trump, don't follow it that closely, but he seems to be doing gaffe after gaffe. And his odds are falling. But he's won the Republican Party, and now if you put £1 down with my spread betting company, you'll lose £18 if Hillary wins.
Do you want to plug your spread betting company?
No, I don't, so they're evil. But you'll win £82. So that's an £18 loss against an £82 win. So I think that's worth a bet. So in fact I bought Trump the day before yesterday.
Okay. Well, you went to see Bill Burr the other night.
Oh, I saw him. I was there as well.
Were you? Right. Okay. Well, we went the second night, I think.
Okay.
And,
I actually fell asleep. But that's
oh, right.
wow,
How could
you
you
must
do
be
No,
that?
he's brilliant. He's
I
brilliant.
thought-
But I just was exhausted.
I thought the gorilla thing was one of the funniest things I'd seen in
Yeah.
my life, like the gorilla thing. But he said a true thing, I think, about Trump, which was he talks like a wrestler.
Yeah.
Or like a,
We're gonna
like
build
a
a
boxer.
wall.
We're going to do this. We're going to build. He's not going to build a wall. He's not going to do. He's playing to the gallery, and he's talking a big fight, and he's appealing to that.
Sure,
group
and Americans love that stuff.
Yeah.
They like big talk.
Yeah. But so it's the devil in the deep blue sea. I know people like Walter Blocks threw his weight into Trump.
But he
PJ
even
O'Rourke,
says,
bizarrely, has said he's
Yeah.
come out in favour of Hillary Clinton.
PJ O'Rourke has.
PJ O'Rourke has said that.
Yeah.
I know what's going on in the
I
world.
narrated a documentary about her behind the scenes one when she was Secretary
Why
of State.
isn't the woman
she
in
is
jail?
An evil woman.
Why is she not in jail? Can anybody answer that?
No, I can't. And she's a narcissist and God knows what else.
well, you plugged that documentary that you voice-overed.
Oh, what, the one about Hillary?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a long time. I can't actually remember what it's called. I think it was called Inside the Secretary of State or Behind Inside the Behind the Secretary of State or something like that. But it was on Nat Geo about 5 or 6 years ago. It wasn't anything I wrote or anything. I just voiced it. But I remember thinking, oh, you're an awful woman.
Well, I mean, it burns my toast black, especially when she sort of flaunts her feminist credentials. And you go, how feminist were you when your husband was lying about affairs that he'd had with interns? Where was your feminist credentials then? You were absolutely silent. You know.
I always felt rather sorry for him, and now I think when she was having all those affairs, but now I understand what motivated them.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, it's from a libertarian perspective, it's not a great choice in the American general election. I mean, I think in a way on foreign policy, Hillary's a lot more dangerous than Trump is, because the anti-war movement goes to sleep in America under Democrats. So if Trump tries to do something on foreign policy, there'll be pushback. If Hillary does, there might well be crickets, as there has been with Obama, who's bombed 8 Muslim countries, as there was when Clinton bombed Kosovo and, blew up a medical factory in Sudan that supplied half of the place's, medical supplies. No pushback from the left, or almost none. In terms of economics, he's got a lot to. He seems to think that China giving America cheap goods is bad for Americans somehow. I mean, I know, okay, well, we're not manufacturing them. Well, make better stuff then, America. But I think what he's trying to do is an old trick, which is get people to say, look, there's an enemy over there that the government's not doing anything about. China, they're devaluing their currency. Not that we've ever devalued our currency. He's rousing people up by saying there's an enemy in China. He's a great tactician. However, when it comes down to it, he has said some good things about Western intervention, about getting out of NATO, and he has said some good things about lowering regulations and things like that. So I guess it's going to be a close race, and we'll just need to get some popcorn.
It's exciting.
Shall we hear more about your show?
Sure. Well, so
tell everybody where it's on first of all.
Okay, so the show about tax is on at the Gilded Balloon, and it's on at 4:00 in the afternoon, and it's called Let's Talk About Tax. I should really have bought a flyer, but I didn't think of that.
Yeah, poster in the background.
And
anyway.
It's quite a funny. You guys saw it the day before. Yes, it's a funny show. There's quite a few jokes in it. I've taken a lot of traditional pub jokes and reversioned them with a financial and economic theme, and I think did you learn quite a lot watching the show about tax?
I'll tell you what I learned. I picked up on something and it astounded me. You had, and I just want to check the stats, because there was a stat up there about the defence budget.
Oh yeah.
Comparative to what we raise in revenue, and it was something like 10%. And I thought, that can't be right. I mean, I don't know. It seemed very, very low.
On that pie chart?
Yeah. Is that taking into account like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, or is that just the general military spending?
Whatever's on that pie chart will be right.
Right.
And it was probably military spending, but on one of them, I think I might have put defence and police in the same thing to simplify.
And as low as 10%.
It's not. We don't spend that much on it.
Really?
The big expenses.
Staggering.
Yeah. No, it's the big ones are pensions. Pensions is the killer.
Yeah.
£1 in every 5. NHS, and then welfare and education. Those are the 4 killer ones. And if we didn't have NHS, the one I say about pensions is that many of those pension obligations were taken on before you had a right to vote on them.
Right.
It's taxation without representation. But NHS and education and welfare, which in my opinion would all be better if they were looked after by the free market, and cheaper.
And they would cost a fraction.
A fraction of the price,
sometimes
and infinitely
people say
more
something
variety
like from every £1 you get taxed for welfare, only like 33 pence or something like that actually goes to poor people. The Red Cross, who are one of the least efficient charities, manage 45% in aid. Things like Oxfam and Barnardos, they manage up in the 80% of how much money actually goes to helping people. So you talk a lot about how the government has increased the prices of houses. If we could remove that, those incentives, the printing of money, the quantitative easing, all the regulations about who can and cannot build, withdraw, the multiple occupancy license, the height restrictions. If we could get houses to come down, all of our welfare spending and pension spending and stuff like that would fall as well anyway, because we need to give those people less money to look after them.
Sure. Housing benefit is a massive spend.
Yeah.
Please go on.
Or I haven't got the figure to pluck to mind, but I know that a lot of money is needlessly spent on housing benefit.
Yeah.
So
That is either a lot of that money ends up going to private landlords as well.
exactly.
It's
So
a
it's basically
rent-seeking-
a transfer of wealth from people who don't have property to
Yeah.
people who do have property.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what made you want to do this show?
Well, because tax is this incredibly important subject. The whole tax is power.
Yeah.
Whether it's kings or emperors or governments, if they lose their tax revenue, they lose their power. And the way a society is taxed speaks volumes about that society. Tax is behind everything that we do. Tax is how you shape people, how they behave. They're a product of their tax systems. Tax is how you shape entire societies. And, reforming tax is one of the few ways by which politicians really could change the world. And all they really do is just tinker around the edges.
Right.
But core, not taxing income, taxing other things instead of income. Would make such a dramatic change to the way wealth is distributed in society. It's this vast, vast subject. And it's, I look for simple cures to all these problems. There's often a zero patient. If you can get the zero patient, then everything else, the knock-on stuff. And for me, the zero patients are our system of money and our system of tax. And if you can change those, then everything else follows from there. So tax is this huge subject. But if you go on Amazon, you look for books on tax, there's nothing. There's one book called The Joy of Tax by a left-wing economist called Richard Murphy, who is very bright and he is a machine. He's so productive, the amount of words he writes. I follow his blog, but my God, he's loony left. Christ. Somewhere to the left of Corbyn. And so there's him, and he's doing it, uttering the left side. And he's very good at what he does, despite this fact that his politics are diametrically opposed to mine. And that's it. There's just nothing. And if you go on YouTube, type in taxation, there's nothing about it. It's all like how to pay your income tax, or how to get your tax bill done, or outrage at some foreign tax haven. And there's nothing about tax being a way that you can fix society.
Well, you better finish your book quickly, since you've just now told everyone what your niche in the market is.
I'm going to write it. That's my job for September.
I mean, how much of your audience do you think is just singing to the choir, and how many people in there do you think are...
I don't know, because when I do my question at the beginning, who thinks we pay too much tax and who thinks we don't pay enough, it's usually about 50-50.
Right.
There's a lot of accountants come to that show. There's quite a big grey contingent.
Well, accountants need a life as well.
No, they do, but I mean, it's their business, and it's the first time they've seen a comedy show about taxation. And obviously in Edinburgh, it's a financial centre, a long tradition of finance. So it is of interest to these people. But, I wish more kind of politically active people were coming, because
because it's important. It's extremely important. Yeah,
I think so. But
everything else is kind of tinkering around the edges unless you actually tackle taxation.
It really is. And so. But anyway, it's selling out every day, which most people don't do at Edinburgh Festival. So that's very positive. And it's, what should we call it? Infotainment. You will learn as well as laugh.
It is entertaining and it is informative, and I definitely recommend everyone who's watching this or listening to it on iTunes get down to Dominic's show. Yeah. Now, you do have a proposed solution to the tax problem and the spending problem in this country. Would you like to give this quick pitch for that?
My solution is land value tax. Now, when we tax income, we are taxing the wealth that is earned. We are taxing productivity. Instead, we should tax what we use, what we consume. We should tax the wealth that is unearned. Nobody made land. Nature gave it to us. By building or farming or mining it, you've improved it. Yeah. But the land itself was always there. So we look at the unimproved value of land, and that's very easy to assess. And not just land, but broadcast spectrums, airspace, mineral wealth. Why should the oil under the sands of Saudi Arabia belong to a few princes? It was unearned wealth that should have belonged to everyone. And if you want the right to occupy a plot of land, in other words, for that plot of land to be yours, and you want the government to protect your title to that property, then a rent needs to be paid to the community that reflects the value of that land. Yeah. Because it's the needs of the community that have given the land value. And That sounds kind of very idealistically communist, quite left-wing socialist. And Milton Friedman, who is the granddaddy of right-wing economists, he described it as the least bad tax.
Right.
And we had the passing of the Duke of Westminster the day before yesterday. The person, by the way, if you had land value tax in the UK, the person who paid the most is the Queen.
Right.
She owns the most of it. And then the Duke of your neighbour, the Duke of Bewley or the Duke of Buccleuch.
Duke of Buccleuch, right.
How do you say it?
I
Buccleuch?
usually say the Duke of Buccleuch, but I don't know if I'm actually,
I think Buccleuch, I think if you're English you might say Bewley, but Buccleuch.
Probably.
But Buccleuch, I like the way you said it, I think I prefer the way. And the Duke of Atholl and this chap, Captain Alwyn Farquharson, who I'd never heard of. But we had the passing of the Duke of Westminster. Now his son is set to, who is 24, is set to inherit £9 billion. Or a wealth of £9 billion. Now that Duke of Westminster's estate, that was built in the early 18th century through the exploitation of another tax subsidy, which is the Corn Laws, which is basically a protection that stopped corn from overseas coming into the UK so that UK farmers could sell their corn at an inflated rate.
Yeah.
And a few landowning families made a great deal of money out of the Corn Laws, one of which was the estate of Westminster. And they built... One of the areas where they had a lot of land was in London, which wasn't built on at the time, and they built Belgravia and large parts of West London.
Okay.
And, there were lots of different landowning families, and inheritance tax ruined most of them, post-war inheritance tax. But the Duke of Westminster did a Google, and he exploited a tax loophole, as has the Queen and the Duke of Buccleuch and the Duke of Atholl. They all pass their land from one generation to the next through the system of trusts, which again is fine. But while the rest of us have to pay inheritance tax and they don't, it means that they remain incredibly rich, and the rest of us, you work all your life and then suddenly you give half it back to the taxman. Not half it, but you know what I mean. And so it is inherently unjust, and it means that a few landed people keep hold of all this land.
The land bank.
And Battersea Power Station is a good example of land banking. All these building companies, they just sit on land and watch it appreciate. And that's the thing. The Duke of Westminster owns half of London. Nobody else is allowed to build anything because of planning laws. So he's been effectively awarded a monopoly.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. And now 65 million people in the UK, 60 million acres. There's enough for an acre each.
Right.
And that includes kids, pretty much.
Right.
But of the 65 million people in the UK, fewer than 6,000 own more than 70% of land. So it is the most unequal distribution of the basic wealth that is land.
Yes.
And so what my argument is instead of paying tax on your income, which is wealth that is earned, you pay tax on the land you own. You own. And the reason why it's so beneficial is, firstly, it's you're incentivizing production.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to pay a tax. You're not taxing production, so you incentivize it. It is a tax that is voluntary. You do not have to pay this tax if you don't want to. You just simply don't own land or sell the land to someone else who is prepared to. Most landowners, by the way, receive subsidy on top of everything else for the land that they own. And that's another reason why we got out of the EU. So it's a tax that is clear. Our tax code is the longest tax code in the world. Most people don't realise it, but effectively you work 22 years without pay in order to honour your side of the contract of the Heart Society, to cover your share of all the things that the government gives us. And all the complexity in our tax code creates inequality, because some people have got the resources to find the loopholes and other people's don't. And so one group pays tax and another doesn't. This land value tax is clear. The amounts payable on each parcel of land are clear and visible. And so it's voluntary, it's clear, it doesn't take a lot of administration. It's a tax that is impossible to evade. The land is here. Yeah. It is not in the Cayman Islands. There are no loopholes. And it is a tax whereby you can hold your government to account. Because if a government is spending too much, it will quickly have to put up its tax rates. Remember, there's no other tax. There's only land value tax. And it will put up, and so government spending will be visible. They can't hide it in the way that they do today. And there's another reason why it's so beautiful, but I can't remember what it is.
Who values the land? Who makes that decision?
You need government employed assessors.
Okay.
And the way the simple way to value land, you value land based on the permission it has, its location, the resources. One way to do it is, let's say you have a plot of land that is an acre, and if that, or let's use a much smaller plot, a quarter of an acre, and if that land is in what's a poor part of Glasgow, say, a house on that plot of land might be worth, I don't know, £50,000, but the same house on a plot of land in the centre of London might be worth £5 million.
Yeah.
But the build cost of the house is the same. So effectively, the land value is what did I say? 4.5 million.
Yeah.
So the land value of that London thing is £4,450,000 as opposed to the £50,000. So that's a simple way to get your land value, and it's quite easy to assess. You just work it out based on the neighbouring land values, comparing land values around the country. There'll be algorithms and spreadsheets that do it, and the only administration is assessing each. Once you've got through the initial problem of working out how much each parcel of land in the country is worth, you just have to, every year you just go back and say, has this bit of land gone up or gone down?
Yeah.
It's very easy to do.
And what it appeals to me is, well, it creates a buyer's market for land, which means if you're on the far left and you have a communist persuasion, you can go and get your land pretty cheap with your buddies and set up a commune.
Sure.
If you're an anarchist and you want to opt out of the system and just get your solar panels and your compost toilets and your generator and live off the grid, then you're able to do that. And it means that people aren't so locked into everything they have to do. There's so many gatekeepers, the government, and never mind the money, which is considerable, but the time that is spent of all these lobbyists, accountants, lawyers around tax evasion and things like that. They can actually go out and get real jobs now, helping people. So it does sound to me like the least bad tax, and I really appreciate your illustration of that for us.
One maybe last question before we wind up quickly. Who's going to win the comedy award this year, and is it wired? Is it normal? Do they know in advance usually who they're going to give it to?
I think there's a lot of confirmation, but I don't think it's rigged.
Right.
There's certainly a lot of lobbying that will go on by the top agents and so on.
Okay.
But I don't think it's rigged. But and I really don't know who's going to win it. Probably maybe James Acaster, because he always seems to get nominated and never wins. Okay. Sam Simmons won it last year. There'll be a couple of surprises.
Have you any sort of ones that you've seen that you think's maybe in the
I've watched one show, which was Bill Burr, and I fell asleep. I've been so deep in my own show. So my finger really isn't on the pulse. Yeah. To be honest, I am fantasizing. I'm having to fight myself, because I'm fantasising that I'm going to be in the frame for one of my shows. Maybe,
especially after this.
Well, the upper class rapper's funnier, so that maybe that. But it's too kind of it's had no publicity. But so I don't know. But I think what happened last year, the show that won it was Sam Simons, and that was a great show.
Okay.
But I watched all the Perrier-nominated shows last year, and it was almost like the best roster of shows I've ever seen. There were so many good shows. And you had like Sam Simmons, who was kind of quite quirky. Then you had this guy, Seymour Mace. Seymour Mace could win it this year. He's a good comedian. But Seymour is so left field and wacky. Right. And then you had a mime guy. And then you had this guy, Joseph Morpurgo. He might be in it as well. His show last year was fantastic. Lots of multimedia. Yeah. And so there was a real variety. And Sarah Kendall, who was just, pure stand-up. And so there was a real kind of roster of different aspects of comedy. And Sam just had a bit of everything. So it was a real, almost like a committee decision. Yeah. Because it kind of ticked all the boxes. And so even though his show was brilliant, I'm not knocking him, it was like a compromise between all the other ones. It was a real classic decision by a committee. Okay. But so I don't know who's going to win this year, but all those names that I've just said will be in the frame. Nish Kumar might be in there as well. Right, all right. Which would be a blow against libertarians the world over.
Right.
All right.
Great. Well, look, so plug your show one more time so that everyone
Let's
knows
talk
where
about
to find
tax
it.
in the Gilded Balloon and the Upper Class Rapper in the Voodoo Rooms in the evening.
So check out The Fringe.
Yeah. Dominic, once again, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
For coming on. It's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
guys.
so much for coming on the
really
show.
nice to meet you both. And
I had a great time. Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
for tuning in, folks. It's been great, and always remember, be a libertarian
Don't be a lefty.
and don't be a righty.